Thanks so much for joining, everybody. My name is Lucas Fraser, and I'm the president of CEP Ottawa. We're a volunteer-led nonprofit organization based in Ottawa, but with chapters all across Canada. And our goal is essentially to connect environmental professionals. It's right in the name. We host events, we host workshops, and we try to get people together both for fun and for professional development around environment and sustainability topics. This event that you've joined tonight is the third in a series on, or it's actually the fourth in a series on developing a career in sustainability. This is a series that we've done because we heard over 40% of our audience is actively looking for a work, either as a result of COVID or for another reason. And so we just want to try to provide value where value is needed. So thanks so much for joining us. In the first event of this kind, this is the second panel where we hear from sustainability professionals as they talk about their careers. In the first of this kind, we heard some really interesting and inspiring stories. That's all on YouTube, so I won't get too much into the details. That's the CEP Ottawa YouTube channel. But today we're hearing from young leaders working in sustainability in Ottawa, and we'll discuss the career paths that they've taken. So I hope you'll listen to their tips as you're starting and building your own careers in the field. A little bit of housekeeping. There will be a networking portion in breakout rooms at 7. So I hope you stick around until then. You'll actually get a chance to meet some of the other participants as well as the panelists and ask some questions and really get into it. We'll also be after that taking a group photo. So stick around. You're going to have to at least one time tonight turn on your camera. Tonight's event will be moderated by Pallavi Roy. She's the VP Events at CEP Ottawa, has her PhD from Ryerson University, and is currently a Clean Technology Policy Advisor with ISED. So she's going to be doing a great job of moderating. If you have any questions throughout the event for the speakers, you can send them directly to Pallavi to ask the panelists, or to a specific panelist. Direct them to a specific panelist if possible. It's better that we don't have all our questions go to all three, because then each question takes quite a long time. So if you have a specific question, direct it to a specific person. To introduce our speakers and to run the panel session, I'll now hand it over to you, Pallavi.
Thanks, Lucas. Hi, everyone. It's great to see a lot of interest in this panel. We have some great panelists today. So without taking more time, let's go to that. So today we have with us three young and movers and shakers from the sustainability world. We have Nivatha Balendra, who's the CEO and founder of Dispersa, Phil De Luna, who's the director of National Research Council, and Mike Shoesmith, who is the senior technical consultant at Stratos. Let's just get into it. And let's hear from our panelists why they started a career in sustainability and how they got to it. So we'll do it alphabetically, and I'll start with Nivatha. Why don't you tell us why you chose a career in sustainability, how it happened, what's your journey been like so far?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me here today. It's really great to be here and to talk about, our career paths in sustainability. So I'm Nivatha, CEO and founder of Dispersa. We're in the green chemistry sector. So our startup is actually based in Montreal. And this is a startup that I founded in 2019, which is when we launched. What we do is actually harness the power of microbes to deliver a natural alternative to synthetic chemicals on the market. So as you know, chemicals are integrated in pretty much every products and processes that are integrated in our daily lives. But there's a specific ingredient known as surfactants, which you may or may not have heard of, but is actually found at the core of a lot of soapy products that we use, especially during the pandemic. And so these surfactants are actually petroleum derived. And so what we're doing at Dispersa is developing a fermentation process that will allow us to deliver, using microbes, a completely natural, biodegradable, and of course, affordable alternative to the synthetic surfactants on the market. So that's essentially the first product line that we're developing at the moment. And so naturally, our technology could be used in a lot of different industries. One that I mentioned being cleaning products, personal care, industrial remediation, as well as other sectors, agriculture, and so forth. And so really what started Dispersa was something that I would say began when I was in CEP, which is, I guess, equivalent to high school in the rest of Canada. And so basically at the age of 17, I entered a science fair competition. And in 2013, there was an oil spill close to where I live, and it's in Lac Mégantic. And so this train crash really motivated me after hearing about how devastating this incident was in terms of not only over 5 million gallons of oil being spilled, but also the devastating impact it had on the local rural community. And so it really hit close to home and made me realize how impactful oil spills are. And so I sort of ventured off into developing this research project for a science fair, which stemmed from the concept of bioremediation and how we can use the tiniest organisms that we have on Earth, microbes, to sustainably remediate polluted sites. And so starting that is essentially what had me delve into the realm of sustainability. So professionally, my degree has always been in health sciences, but with this research, I started gaining external experience outside of university through hands-on lab internship and experience working with PhD professors and other institutions, which really opened my eyes to environmental sciences, and I loved it. And so essentially, with this project, after developing it, I realized how it could really be commercialized into a real life solution. And that's when I took the transition into starting Dispersa. And so, I mean, what started off as a solution for remediation now is into a larger picture, since our microbes can actually produce these soap-like compounds to be used in different industries instead, one being remediation. So that's really, I'd say, the journey in which took me into sustainability was really not a linear trajectory. I think it was more about where life took me and where the opportunities really directed me into these different areas, which really resonated with me because I'm someone who loves using science to solve the world's biggest issues.
Thanks, Nivatha. That's a really interesting, your path on sustainability and having, a big event like Lac Mégantic, which was, in the news and we all heard about it, and really, kind of see that the impacts of that inspire you to create, positive outcomes from it is, a good story to hear, and, a positive outcome in some ways down the line, however, difficult that situation was at that time. So that's great that, you've come along this path to create Dispersa, and I, hope you find lots of great success with it. So let's move on to Phil. So Phil, you have achieved, you a lot at a young age. You were, we were a Carbon X Prize finalist, top 30 under 30. So tell us, what's your path been on sustainability and your journey so far?
Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to echo the thanks for having me on as a panelist. It is a great program. And Nivatha, I was really inspired by your story, and a lot of it resonated with me, especially the nonlinear path. And as I talk about my journey, I think a lot of people in their lives will have nonlinear paths to whatever it is they do. So maybe I'll start way back. I moved to Canada when I was 5 years old. I'm Filipino. My parents moved here, and I grew up in Windsor, Ontario, which was the automotive capital of Canada. In 2007, 2008, that industry kind of faded, and a lot of the plants in the community shut down. My dad worked at Ford, and then he was laid off, and he's kind of been bouncing around at factory job to factory job since. So I never really grew up with much in the way of money, but my parents did always instill in me sort of a hard work ethic. And more importantly, they said, we don't have much to give you, but we can give you an education. And no matter what happens, people can't take away what you know. And so I really took that to heart at a very young age. I remember when I was a kid, the Magic School Bus and Bill Nye the Science Guy were my favorite shows. And I always knew I wanted to be a scientist. So I kind of started on that path really young. I went to the University of Windsor for my undergraduate in chemistry, and I actually wasn't that great of a student. I ended up having like I breezed through first year without really trying, and then in second and third year, reality hit, and I was too busy going out and meeting people and having fun outside than actually studying and for exams. It was in sort of fourth year where I realized I needed to kind of figure something out, and I turned to research, and that really sparked a passion in me. Because it's one thing to learn and to try to study for an exam and memorize to get good grades, and it's another thing to do research where you're doing something for the first time, pushing the boundaries of knowledge in whatever way you can. And it really stuck with me because I was working at my own pace and I was doing things for me, not just because curriculum told me to do it. So that's when things really took off. I started publishing papers. I published two papers in my undergrad, and then went to the University of Ottawa for my master's in chemistry, where I started publishing a bit more there. And then I moved to the University of Toronto for my PhD, where things really kind of took off. In my PhD, I studied, in my master's, I was working on materials for CO2 capture, metal organic frameworks, which were these sort of nanoscopic sponges, you could think of them, powders that could suck CO2. And then in my PhD, I was focused on new materials to convert carbon dioxide into renewable fuels and chemicals, a field we term artificial photosynthesis. During my PhD, every summer I went away for an internship or a placement. I went to IBM and the TJ Watson Research Center in New York in my first summer. Then I went to Lawrence Berkeley National Labs and UC Berkeley for my second summer, and then Toyota Research Institute for my third summer. And each of them were a little bit different. The first one was on like large scale simulations for point of care sensing for biomolecules. So you could get a COVID-19 test in, a day or in right there rather than having to wait for a lab. And the second year it was on catalysts for CO2 conversion, which is my background. And in the third year was machine learning for fuel cells and batteries with Toyota. And one of the lessons I learned early on was to find a mentor who was invested in my success and whose success was also my success. And the only reason I was able to do all those things is because I had an amazing supervisor and mentor in my PhD. And during my PhD, he let me do lots of things beyond just leave his lab for summers at a time. I also was working with our group to compete in the Carbon X Prize. And so after our first Nature came out, the X Prize competition was giving a call. And we submitted an application not thinking we would get in. We were working literally on like the size of a Rubik's Cube is the size of the reactor. And we got in. And then in the span of less than a year, we scaled that up from milligrams per hour to an order of magnitude, kilograms per day, the size of a Rubik's Cube to the size of a large industrial fridge. And that got us into the final round of the Carbon X Prize. And then it was around this time too that my name came out on the Forbes top 30 under 30 list. And I thought that I could use all of this hype and all of this excitement to try to start a company. One small caveat was that the technology was owned by an oil and gas company. They had paid us preemptively for the intellectual property, so for them to own it. But I was able to negotiate like a royalty-free, non-exclusive license with them. The VP of Science and Technology was a mentor of mine as well through this project. And so I was doing the whole startup thing, trying to find funding, talking to venture capitalists, getting into Creative Destruction Lab, doing all this fun stuff. And then this position at the NRC came online. And to be completely frank, I applied to it again, not thinking I would get it because I thought I'm not a 50-year-old white guy. But I applied to it anyway. And I applied to it to put pressure on my professor to commit to the startup, to signal to him, hey, I'm not going to be around here forever. Let's do this thing. Let's make it real. And then I had a conversation with him and he said, I think the technology is too early. Why don't you stay on as a postdoc and we'll work on the X Prize. And I said, if I'm going to work with you, I want to work with you as a partner in a company, not for you as a postdoc. And it was difficult because this was the guy who gave me every opportunity to succeed. But looking back on it now, that experience really shaped me and made me understand that it takes more than just good technology to change the world. You need a market. You need someone to buy it. You need someone who's willing to take the risk and invest in it. And with clean energy, it takes millions of dollars and many years to scale things up from technology readiness level 1 to 10. Whereas if you're making an app, all you need is some coffee and a laptop, and you can go be the next Facebook. So that was an important lesson for me to learn. But since then, I've been at the NRC. I was hired to start and lead this program. It's a 7-year, $57 million collaborative research program, and it's called the Materials for Clean Fuels Challenge Program. We have 3 thrusts: CO2 conversion, clean hydrogen production, and artificial intelligence for materials discovery. I'm based in Toronto, and we've built a brand new national lab in Mississauga, where we're going to have these self-driving automated labs, these little mini robots that will make a material, test the material, characterize the material, and then use artificial intelligence to determine the next material to make in a closed loop. And what I do now, I consider my job as a research capitalist. So similar to how a venture capitalist tries to find startups to invest in, and their return on investment is money in a span of 2 or 3 years, I'm trying to find good research ideas and good partners to invest in. My return on investment is potential emissions reductions, and my time horizon is 10 years plus. And so my program portfolio, I have 20 projects. We awarded 9.2 billion this year, and we have projects in Canada, the United States, Germany, and the UK, with primarily academic groups, but with some startup companies as well, such as Econa Power, Solistra, and Ionomer. And we're well on our way. Of course, it's been difficult with the pandemic, but I'm hoping that as this program continues, we're going to be pushing some of this technology from low technology readiness level to mid TRL. And that's the job I do at the NRC. But then I also wear a few other hats. I'm the vice chair on the board of directors for CMC Research Institutes, which is a carbon tech nonprofit based out of Calgary. I sit on the advisory or the steering committee for advanced materials at the OECD. I'm on the working group for the AI ethics and sustainable development goals at the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. I'm a Mission Canada champion for this year through Mission Innovation. I'm an Action Canada fellow for this year, which is Public Policy Accelerator Program. And I think there's something else I do, but I forget what it is. I do lots of stuff. So that's my story. That's what I do. That's how I ended up here. And it's all very much nonlinear. I always thought I was going to be a professor, but I had a conversation with my partner, my fiance. She works at Sick Kids here in Toronto. She's an operating room nurse. And we had a conversation midway through my PhD. She wanted to stay here. She loves her job. She loves her career. Her family's here. And if you want to be a professor, you kind of have to move around and you never know where you end up. So I made a conscious decision there that I would rather be with her than be a professor. And so throughout my career, I've had all these sort of left, right, and center turns, whether that's, deciding I didn't want to be a professor, figuring out that I couldn't become the next Elon Musk, and now all of the fun adventures I have at the NRC. So that's my story.
Thanks, Phil. That's quite an amazing story. You are doing so much, and you're like literally carrying kind of research in clean technologies by yourself. That is amazing, and I'm sure it comes from like a place of passion. You can see it with like all your various kind of roles. So that's really amazing, and I'm sure all the panelists would have all the participants would have a lot of questions for you as well going forward. But now let's move on to Mike. Mike, so tell us about your sustainability journey, your work at Stratos, which is, I'm assuming, slightly different from what Phil's doing, with Nivatha is doing. So we'd love to hear about this. So tell us about it.
Yeah, thanks, Flavi. And I want to echo what the other guys were saying. Just thanks for having me here today. I was particularly excited to join this panel because you'll be able to tell all of our stories are very unique. And I'm hoping that really just one of us speaks to each of you and you can take away tidbits from kind of each of our stories. So I'm really, really happy to see the kind of the diversity here. I'd say my story kind of started when I was a kid and growing up camping with my family. When I think about reflecting on my childhood, it was always going camping with my folks up north and really developing a relationship with the land and all that brings with it. And then going into high school, I remember I always liked math and science, and I ended up working for the Ministry of Natural Resources. And I'd say that was the first job that really kind of lit the sustainability fire under me. I was doing things like building habitats and filling gabion baskets and all other sorts of manual labor that they give to high school students. But yeah, I ended up going to school for chemical engineering and pretty much an average student. Yeah, I studied chem eng, did an environmental specialization, and in between my third and fourth year, I was lucky enough to get an internship for, it was about a year and a half in between my third and fourth year at a vaccine manufacturer, which reflecting back now is particularly interesting. It's actually the place where insulin was invented before it became a vaccine plant, which was pretty neat. And yeah, it was called Sanofi Pasteur, and I worked as part of the health safety environment team. And I'd say my job was a generalist in environmental management. I was responsible for managing different aspects of sustainability and environmental compliance on site, from wastewater discharges. Really old sites have really big issues. I realize that because they're following standing operating procedures from recipes or manufacturing process from up to 100 years ago at times. Or I'd be talking about 1 week, all of a sudden, all right, I need to get rid of 1,000 liters of pertussis, and who's gonna take this and incinerate it for me, to looking at air quality permits and discharge and yeah, all other sorts of compliance things as well. And I really liked this because I could kind of look at the compliance side of things and make sure we were doing less harm and following the rules. But I also had an opportunity to work on the sustainability side of things and do more good. So from energy reduction and water reduction projects where we are optimizing their own power plant, I really got excited about the work I was doing there. And yeah, then I went back to Queens and finished my my undergrad. While I was there the last few years, I was part of a climate change advocacy group, and that really got me interested in climate change and passionate about that. And when I graduated, I ended up working for about 4 years as an air quality engineer for a global engineering firm out of Denmark called Ramble. And yeah, my focus was on both the GHG and the typical air pollutant side of things. So in a nutshell, I was working mostly for heavy industry. Specifically, steel was a big focus of mine, also pharmaceuticals and chemical. And I was climbing around their smokestacks and measuring what was coming out and modeling and seeing where it was going and making sure I wasn't harming anyone on the ground. And yeah, it was very much, I would say, like a traditional engineering design type of job, and helped me really develop my technical chops and engineering capacity, where I ended up getting my PN, my professional engineering designation as well. And then my partner, and Phil, I don't know if you just got engaged, but I just got engaged, and I'm getting used to saying fiance too.
You did, yeah. Congratulations.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, she ended up taking a residency position in Ottawa, and I started exploring opportunities out here. And I liked what these guys were saying too about, you know, it's a nonlinear path. And I really like the saying, don't necessarily follow your passion, follow your curiosity, because I personally didn't know what my passion was, but I was I had a hankering for things I was interested in. And specifically, I knew I wanted to work on more impactful climate-related work, and was lucky enough to get in touch with my current company. It's a boutique management sustainability consulting firm, and there's about 30 of us, and we do things all across the breadth of sustainability services, but I'll focus on kind of what I do mostly, which is I kind of call myself an engineering whisperer. I'm the technical consultant at Stratos. We don't do engineering work, but I have to know enough about certain topics to be able to speak the language and at times do stakeholder engagement or translate it for senior management for briefing and decision making. So to give you a couple kind of practical examples, I'm doing work in climate change adaptation, specifically looking at government departments and their vulnerability to climate change and how it can impact their ability to deliver their mandate. Doing that currently for CERNAC, Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, and ISC, Indigenous Services Canada. And then I do a whole bunch of work as well in the north, and mostly with northern contaminated sites, including the two largest in Canada, and I believe two of the biggest ones in the world, over $1 billion in liability each, that were essentially mining sites that weren't regulated 50, 80 years ago and are now responsible, Canada's responsible for cleaning them up. And so this is the Faro and Giant Mine site, and I'm doing risk management work for them, both in terms of technical risk, so talking to all the engineering experts, knowing just enough to be able to roll it up and present it to management, to know where to spend the money and what kind of stuff they have to act on, and management risk. So yeah, I'd say my expertise is really in risk management there. And yeah, I could go on a few different things, but maybe I'll stop there and pass it back to you, Flavia.
Thanks, Mike. I'm a chemical engineer too, and I had lots of friends who actually went to Sanofi to do their internships.
Right on.
So yeah, that's very popular in Toronto. If you're doing chemical engineering, you kind of, Sanofi is one of the places you end up. So yeah, great to hear that. Great to hear your story and how you've kind of like bridged from that engineering background to kind of the risk management side of things, and giving advice to governments and things like that, which is very fascinating to hear. And yeah, like you said, you could probably tell us more about it. But let's go to kind of the next question. So I'm going to direct it to Nivatha again. So Nivatha, we've heard a bit about your personal story. Now we'd love to hear about what you think are some kind of sustainability challenges that are there in Canada, more from a perspective of like what other people, should be looking at while they're kind of also on their journeys in sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great question, and I don't know where I can start. I think there is a plethora of different environmental sub-challenges, but in a way, I feel that they're all really interconnected to how can we transition to a low carbon economy, and how is it that we can reduce our environmental footprint as well. And so I think that globally in the clean tech industry, there are many different opportunities. It's not only about being part of a startup, but also, policy making is also really important as well. And so I think there's really different aspects, and really it's a multifaceted approach, which when developed in parallel is really when we'll be able to achieve and address all of those environmental solutions for the challenges in Canada. But if I were to look at a few key challenges probably that Canada is focusing on right now, I think one of the areas, as I mentioned, is definitely how can we develop a more circular economy approach. So how can we as consumers not only reduce our waste, but valorize that waste to value. And I think that's a really great area, especially where Phil is as well. And I think in terms of reducing our carbon emissions, as well as other types of waste, whether it be food waste, agro-industrial waste. And so that's an area where, us as Dispersa, we're also looking into is how can we develop these high value materials that we're still using, we're going to continue using it, but how is it that we reduce our dependence on the fossil fuels and now be able to still use the same materials, have the same products and processes, but now with renewable ingredients or renewable products. And I think that's really where one angle of the future is going, but really there are different sectors as well, clean renewable energy being one as well. But if I were to look at it from where we are at Dispersa, it's really about not only delivering renewable chemicals that are from non-petroleum feedstock, but how is it that we can, in a way, tackle two problems in one, reducing waste, but delivering high value materials at the same time. And also as consumers, I think that's sort of that circular economy approach in terms of waste to value. So I think that's definitely one area where I would say one focus area.
Thanks, Nivatha. Yeah, definitely. Circular economy is, getting the recognition that it needs. It definitely being talked about around the world. And Canada is doing a lot, I think, in that area as well. So hopefully, it takes up and people manage to find those kind of, waste to value waste, essentially. So now going to Phil, what do you think are some of the environmental and sustainability challenges in Canada?
Yeah, That's a great question. I think when people ask what the challenges are in Canada, we have to recognize how diverse Canada is just geographically. So the message I want to get across is that we need a broad range of different solutions depending on the place. I'll give you an example. What's going to work in Quebec won't necessarily work in Alberta, won't necessarily work in BC. In Quebec and BC, you have an abundance of hydroelectricity and can have low carbon electricity. So we can make, for example, clean hydrogen or green hydrogen through electrolysis in those jurisdictions. But that may not necessarily be the case in Alberta, where you have a lot of cheap natural gas, and you may want to go through blue hydrogen, which is hydrogen from steam methane reforming coupled with carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Broadly, I think there's sort of three steps that we as a country have to embark on. The first is to deploy and scale out renewable electricity generation everywhere as much as we can. Our grid is already about 75%, 80% renewable, or at least emissions free, if you include the nuclear that's happening in Ontario. But let's get it to 100%. And then second, it's electrify everything that we possibly can. So that's electrification of homes through heat pumps, or the electrification of lightweight mobility transportation through electric vehicles, and the infrastructure to support all of those things, and the electrification of many industrial processes that could be electrified. And then lastly, the biggest challenge, which is true not only for Canada, but the world, is tackling those hard to abate sectors where you cannot electrify alone. And the International Energy Agency released a report just this September, their Technology Perspectives 2020 report. And they identified that the technologies that are needed to decarbonize the heavy industry sector, the transportation sector, to get to net zero by 2050, 50% of those technologies are non-commercial, which means that they're either in R&D, development, or deployment stage. So there's a massive amount of infrastructure push and investment that needs to happen to get these technologies out of that area. And then a particular challenge that I see for Canada is, how do we address the emissions coming from the oil and gas sector, while also ensuring that we as a country, we have this dichotomy where we want to be environmental stewards, but also promote economic growth. And this is something that we always face. So you can have the government buy a pipeline, but also instill a carbon tax. And for some, that may seem like it doesn't make sense, but we also have to think about how to make this a fair transition so that no one is left behind. And when I think of Alberta, when I think of the oil and gas sector, quite frankly, I see my father in the oil and gas workers there today, where for reasons outside their control, due to global forces that they have no way of knowing, their jobs are being threatened, and it's really difficult to understand that. So we should be moving past an us versus them, or an environmentalist versus an oil and gas worker, and think about us versus the problem, us versus the emissions. And so when the challenge I really do think about is bridging these divides. We as a society, as a country, as a world, it feels like we're becoming more and more polarized. And so I actually think to fight climate change, we need to be more empathetic and try to understand and be inclusive to everyone, whether you're an oil and gas worker, or whether you're an environmentalist, or whether you're somewhere in between. Let's try to work together.
That's a great point, Phil. Yes, definitely. When I asked this question, I was looking for technical problems, but that's a very good point. The bridging those divides, and I think that's a very key challenge that we all have to take part in. Thanks. Okay, Mike. So what about you? What do you think is one of the challenges for sustainability and environment in Canada?
Yeah, thanks. I'm gonna take this in a related but slightly different direction, and it relates to Nivatha's point right at the beginning. I think about these are all kind of related, and there's a whole bunch of issues underneath the umbrella of sustainability, both environmental and social. And then to Phil's point, being inclusive and equitable in this transition as well. And when we're considering these environmental challenges, I don't want to lose sight of the equally important social challenges and diversity challenges and other things going across Canada, and specifically, I'm talking about Indigenous reconciliation. And I guess what I'm personally coming up with a lot in a lot of my work is really starting to understand not just the importance, but the value of integrating and learning from Indigenous collaborators and using Indigenous knowledge combined with Western scientific approaches. And I'll give you one specific example. I mentioned I'm currently working on the Giant Mine, which is a mine just outside of Yellowknife, 240,000 tons of arsenic buried underground. Currently, the plan is forever until they have a better plan, because they literally can't get rid of it right now. And there's some affected Indigenous communities that have been there for time millennia. And the project was mandated to do something called a quantitative risk assessment, very much a Western scientific-based risk assessment. But they had to broaden this to be holistic and to incorporate traditional knowledge. And one of our roles was to come in and ensure that that knowledge was brought into the process through engagement and through learning from specifically the elders. And we did learn about very practical, tangible things like the land and the animals and the resources around that could be affected by failures with the mine site. But what really stood out to me was the completely different value systems and ways of knowing and perspectives being brought to completely flip and challenge our ways of thinking. And now this report is almost done. And the engineers who we're working with and partnered with here, who really questioned the value of this, are saying we would not have as beneficial of a final product and ultimately a safe contaminated site that's not going to release 240,000 tons of arsenic without this engagement. And I think this can be brought into all sorts of our problems. We need to bring in more diverse perspectives to some of these really complicated, complex issues, from from climate change to all the other SDGs. And yeah, I'll pause there, but I just wanted to share that's really kind of close to my heart.
That's a very good point, Mike. The Indigenous, bringing in Indigenous perspectives and that's something for the participants to really take to heart as well. Focusing on that, beyond kind of like the Western methods of science, and bringing in that the traditional Indigenous knowledges and how that can impact sustainability, and help us solve these environmental challenges while focusing on kind of the social facts as well. So yeah, thanks for really bringing in that. We've really not kind of explored that yet through our series, and I feel that's a very important perspective to bring into this. As we have lots of participants who are looking for paths to choose in their sustainability journey as well. So really happy you kind of brought that in. So we have we wanted to go to audience questions, but I have one more question, which I'll combine two questions to be. So a lot of our participants are looking for jobs. So the question for the panelists is, what do you look for when you hire? And what are some of the opportunities and challenges you see for folks going into sustainability? Maybe we'll reverse the order this time and start with Mike.
Yeah, thanks. Guess I have a couple thoughts here. Right off the bat, I would say authenticity and relationship building are just absolutely fundamental to me. Someone who reaches out directly asking for a job probably isn't going to get as much attention as someone who reaches out and wants to learn about what I do and shows an interest. And I guess starting with that authenticity is really important. But in terms of skills, if you want to go in that direction, personally at Stratos, we kind of wear a lot of different hats. And I think of myself as a technical translator. So if I'm looking to hire someone, I look for someone with enough of a technical aptitude to either speak certain languages, whether it be the basics of contaminated sites or clean tech or contaminated sites, or a variety of other issues we're working on, maybe oceans and plastics, but also communication is absolutely critical. We do a lot of stakeholder engagement and facilitation type work. So being able to get into the weeds and look at climate change risks and run, I would say, a lot of deep qualitative analysis. We don't do a ton of quantitative work, but also be comfortable getting in front of a group like this, leading meetings and bringing together people to solve complex issues and bring the most out of people is really important in the work we do.
Thanks. Taking the question over to Phil. Phil, what do you look for when you're hiring, and what are some opportunities and challenges you see for folks trying to get into sustainability?
Yeah, I've done a bit of hiring very recently, and so the things that I look for the most are passion and initiative. When we have a conversation, and I want to have the confidence, I want to know that I don't have to hold your hand necessarily, and that you are able to problem solve and be independent and think and take initiative to go above and beyond and explore new routes. For me, that's really important. You can be the smartest person, but if you're not willing to sort of push your own boundaries and grow and explore new things, or if you're happy to be the smartest person within your sort of set area, that doesn't really help, quite frankly. And especially at the NRC and the jobs that the people we hire for, the projects will change year on year. The direction will change depending on what the government needs or what the people need. You know, what does NRC need to do? I'll give you an example. When the pandemic first hit, I was asked to put on a completely different hat, and I was working on supply chain management for hand sanitizers. I was the hand sanitizer guy, and I was working with some of your colleagues probably at ISED, thinking about what are the regulations, where can we find this. We found, for example, that one of the byproducts of biodiesel industry it could be used as the humectant and the viscous agent in hand sanitizer. Anyway, that's an aside. And then what are the challenges? Well, I mean, of course, we're in a pandemic right now, so it's very difficult in terms of just like the number of jobs that are out there. That being said, I don't think sustainability is going anywhere. I think we're all pretty certain, clear that the trend is that this sector and this area is just going to grow, and the needs are going to, unfortunately, be more and more acute. So I think that everyone who goes into sustainability will have a bright and exciting future. It's the immediate term that's a little bit more difficult. And then just like being very specific with the NRC, it's tough right now because when we hire for someone with a very specific set of background, because we hire to fill projects. And so it's not how it used to be, where we'll hire someone for talent and then they can come and build the project themselves. We really hire for need. So that's very difficult. One position will get 300, 400 applicants. And so one of the other things is to do things and to highlight things either in your resume or in your cover letter that make you stand out from the 200 or 300 other people. And whether that's being involved in an organization like this that shows that you do things beyond just your technical sphere, or being involved in soft skill development activities that practice communication and initiative and leadership. Those are things that I look for. I look for career capital that differentiates people beyond just the technical skills.
Thanks. That's, I think, very good guidance for, I'm sure some of them are going to reach out to you for jobs, after this. So everyone who's listening, make sure you have that career capital highlighted in your resumes. Okay, Nivatha, finally to you. When you're hiring, what do you look for, and what do you see as some opportunities and challenges in the sustainability sector for people looking to join?
Yeah, definitely. I echo what Mike and Phil said. And so in adding to that, as a startup, we're pretty much always in the process of hiring as we're expanding and going on to the next journey of our startup phase. So currently we are hiring as well. You can check out our website. But essentially, when we are hiring, one thing that I look at are essentially three main aspects: passion, innovation, and also being autonomous. So I'll go, I guess, step by step. I think it's really important, first and foremost, to be passionate about sustainability and being able to bring that to the team in which you're working in. I think, especially as we are looking into hiring individuals while we're already a small team, each of us are going to be wearing different hats as a startup and doing more than, a siloed role. And I think that ability to be passionate is really what's going to help us through the highs and lows of a startup, and being able to persevere and still be motivated is really at root to be passionate about what we do. And so I think that's really at the core of, whenever I'm reaching out and speaking to potential candidates. Second is the innovation aspect. As as an evolving, I think, field, clean tech in itself does require a lot of innovation and essentially thinking outside of the box, right? Not even in terms of what the existing technologies are, but where do we see clean tech in 10 years from now, 20 years from now? And how is it that we can really jump from where we are right now, but achieve those goals that we set for ourselves as a nation or globally? And I think essentially as our startup, that's really something that's important for us, is really thinking outside of the box, not in terms of comparing to existing research or other state of the art technology, but how could we innovate as a team? And so whether it doesn't really have to do only with the tech team, but even in other non-technical roles as well, I think innovation is still very key. So that's something that we prioritize. And last but not least, being autonomous. So that's something I would say more. Um, I can speak to our own experience and of a startup, of course, but being autonomous and being driven. And I think this speaks to the point that Phil said as well. We don't often have the capacity to handhold our teammates as we're developing. And I think having autonomous driven candidates and teammates allows us to work as a well-oiled machine together. And that's essentially what I look for when we're hiring. And like Mike and Phil said, I really think that the clean tech industry is booming right now. If anything, I think it's amplified during this pandemic, and globally the economy is just reshaping in terms of prioritizing the global clean tech agenda. And so I feel that there's going to be even more opportunities whenever we do get out of this pandemic, that there's going to be more opportunities for individuals looking for careers in clean tech. And I think it's also important to note that it's not only about being part of a startup, or there's not only one type of clean tech role. I feel the clean tech community globally is formed by stakeholders from industry, from government, which includes policymakers, as well as innovation programs, as well as investors, and also larger corporations. So it's not really one size fits all type of position. I really think that globally there's going to be a strong sustainability component in pretty much any career that's going to be there, from here on.
Well, that's great to hear. That all three of you think that sustainability is not going away; it's becoming stronger, and there should be lots of opportunities, in this field. So I actually have one question that I got. It's for Phil. So Phil, Tianyu wants to ask you, what makes CO2 electrocatalysis so popular in the most recent years? Because Tianyu thinks that there's been dramatic growth since 2017.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, one, I think it's because the advances that's been happening from the scientific perspective have been quite stellar. Secondly, when I think of sort of electrochemical technologies, they really have an ability to think about having a unique solution to renewable energy storage. And what I mean by that is that I think when you look at hydrogen and when you look at power to X and CO2 electrolysis, it covers a lot of boxes, but more importantly, it deals with long-term intermittent energy storage. You can store energy in a battery for maybe, hour to hour, day to day, if that. But how do you store energy that is harnessed in the summer and then used in the winter? Seasonal storage. For that, you really need fuels. And that's also the case when you want to decarbonize the transportation sector. So I think electrochemical CO2 conversion, but CO2 conversion in general, that is able to use those renewable electrons and then look at CO2 as a carrier for those renewable electrons is very exciting. And the fact of is as well is that you have these large corporations who are getting excited about carbon removal technologies and carbon tech in general, and that fits into that. So, for example, with Microsoft saying that they want to be net negative, or with Amazon, or with Shopify with the carbon removal fund. Who would have thought that carbon removal and negative carbon technologies is what the big tech companies would rally around in clean tech? It's really interesting. So I think there's a confluence of a bunch of different factors. I'll be the first to say that it is very far away from being realized. There's a lot of R&D that is still left to go, but it has a potential to be very impactful.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Phil. I have a question from Eric that's for everybody. So it's about, how do you kind of like cultivate your own resilience to bounce back, given that, environment and technical, there are lots of exciting things, but there are also lots of obstacles and failures and, things like that. So yeah, a question for all of you. Feel free to, one, if you can start answering, how do you keep, your own internal resilience, and how do you bounce back and move forward? Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I guess I'll talk kind of personally and professionally. Personally, I find meditation and mindfulness to be supremely powerful in terms of just the gravity of some of the stuff we're dealing with. And one thing I just want to emphasize for all of us right now is it's a really tough time right now for everyone. And just to take time to take care of you right now too, right? Even if you're looking for a job, the market is definitely going to improve. We can only really go up for this sector as per everyone's point. So I just want to highlight there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic, and yeah, I just wanted to share that. And then the last thing is kind of focus on what's within your sphere of control. Some of these issues are just massive, and it requires all of us to do our part on the stuff that's within our control. And doing those things well makes you feel satisfied, and things are just less overwhelming. Maybe I'll stop there.
Thanks. Phil, do you want to go next?
Sure. So you can look at sort of my career and you think, oh, this person, knew what he was doing and it was all great. But there are actually like lots of failures in there. So whether that when I started undergrad and research in undergrad, and because my marks weren't all that good, I went to 3 different professors to volunteer to do research for them, not even like get money, just to volunteer. And 3 of them said no before I found the 4th one who said yes. During my master's, the reason why I didn't stay to do my PhD at the University of Ottawa is because my master's supervisor thought I wasn't good enough to do a PhD in his lab. And so I decided I would just go do a PhD at every other university that I thought was better. And I got accepted to a bunch of other ones. And then, the same thing with realizing and letting go that perhaps being a professor wasn't going to be in my future, and then realizing, letting go that perhaps this startup wasn't the right time for that. And when I look back on all these sort of failures, I realized that there weren't necessarily failures, but rather just an opportunity that I had yet to uncover. But really, in the moment, it feels heartbreaking and it's really tough. So the way that I was able to build that it's not even my internal resilience. It's a support network of friends and family that were there for me. It was my partner, my fiance. It was my close set of friends, the guy friends that I still have a group chat with on Facebook Messenger, and we share like politics and memes and stuff. These are the people that, are going to be there for you, are going to help you through any failure. And then also stepping back and recognizing that life is long and we're all really young. And I think the reason why I'm able to take risks and able to kind of, I have a very simple philosophy, which is like, what's the worst that could happen? If I'm not hurting anyone, and if I'm not, like betting everything on red and then I'm going to become destitute, why not try this new thing? So yeah, I guess those are, maybe that's not good advice. It's more, it speaks to my own personality, which is, but I think what's really important is having a support system and friends and relationships. Because when you die, no one's gonna remember you for how much money you made or what your title was. They're gonna remember how you made them feel, and they're gonna remember how you loved them and they loved you. So just focus on the people in your life, and that'll get you through everything.
That's some great advice, Phil. And I think you're really speaking to a lot of people would agree with. So thanks for that. Nivatha, what about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for sharing, Phil and Mike, as well. I think that failure, honestly, is just something that we have to welcome in our journey. And why I say that is I think that in my own personal journey as well, whether it be failures or obstacles, rather, it's been riddled with them. And I think it's really how I've started to see it is sort of like what Phil just said. It's part of the journey. And in a way, for me, if there's something that didn't work out, I always think of it as an opportunity rather than a setback. So, just bringing you one step closer, that if one thing doesn't work out, figuring out why it didn't work out and not to dwell on it, but just keep pushing forward. And I think it's really important to know that not everything will work out, and that's fine. And I think it's being able to accept that. And I mean, I started this journey when I was 17, and so similar to what Phil mentioned as well, when I was developing my research plan, I probably emailed about 60 professors across Quebec, and everyone said no except one. But that was essentially, like, I would say, one of the early obstacles, like as a young student, is like not having access to really pursue what I want to do. But I think what always motivated me to keep pushing forth is the fact of the possibility that, it could work out, right? And I think it's that, if it doesn't work out, nothing really changes. I'm still going to live my life as usual. But if it does work out, well, that's really awesome. So I think that's essentially the motto. And, in terms of just keep moving on. And I think it's just looking at the, light at the end of the tunnel, at that motivation. I think that's really where passion comes into play, is really believing in what you do, and being passionate and motivated is really what will get you through those nights, those hard times, and being able to push forth. And I mean, on a more personal note, my trajectory definitely wasn't linear. So as I mentioned, when I entered into university, I started thinking about, whether I should start Dispersa and starting this company. And then actually my second year of university, I got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And so going through that and going through 6 months of intensive chemotherapy, it really allowed me to see how short time was, and also being able to really see that we only have one chance at getting this right. And being able to really see that allowed me to realize that starting Dispersa was one of my real truest passions. So promising myself that I would really make that happen. And so coming out of chemotherapy, and I'm 4 years in remission, so I'm fine. But essentially it really it's just to show that all of us go through obstacles in our life, and in different shapes and different forms. And I think it's being able to take that as being part of our journey, rather than stopping there and saying that that's where your journey starts rather than where it ends.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Nivatha. That, like, you're young and you're a CEO, and you've also gone through some personal, challenges, and it's kind of really great to have you with us to kind of share your optimism, with everybody who's joined today. So thank you so much for that. We have a few other questions, but we also want to go into breakout rooms. So maybe I'll ask one more question, which I'll combine two questions into. because they both kind of focus on um, uh, biodegradable natural products and circular economy. So Nivatha, they're directed to you, but other people obviously are also invited to answer. So the biodegradable question is, what do you think about the competitiveness of biodegradable natural products, the scale of the current production and scale up? And the other one is more towards engaging FMCGs towards recycling, plastic recycling, and extended producer responsibility. So it is similar, but two separate questions, one on biodegradable natural products and other about circular economy and extended producer responsibility. So Nivatha, if you can quickly answer, then I'll go to the other panelists and then we'll go into breakout rooms.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great question. And I think it's something that is at the core of any, material science company is like, how do we scale up and have the volume to be able to tackle the actual chemical industry and be able to be at equal production levels. And so I think it really starts at the moment in terms of the quality of the materials. It's definitely equivalent. And, in our case, we're delivering biosurfactants, and so they are natural, they're biodegradable, but they're functionally the same as the chemical surfactants that we're using. And so what I feel right here is, we're already producing these molecules, and right now we're working with clients as well in terms of pilot projects. And so I wouldn't say it's really a performance problem, but just historically, bioprocesses often have a scalability issue. And that really comes in one of two forms, is volume of production and also the cost of production. And so I think being able to tackle both of that, whether it be through upstream or downstream processing, is really important. But that is sort of part of the global challenge when it comes to material science, but I don't think that should really deter the development of this industry. And I really think that it is the future. For example, recently Unilever announced a public press release of diverting from petroleum-based ingredients to now bio-based materials. And this was, a huge statement from the personal care industry, and a lot of other companies followed suit as well. So it's definitely the future of materials is these bio-based ingredients or green chemistry field. But I think that being able to partner with investors, with government, with industry partners who will make that a reality, that's really important. And so as a startup, we have a process developed, and we're just one of many different awesome material science companies out there. And I think that everyone is sort of doing their own part of tackling a different issue. And it's really about acting as a consortium rather than individual. And I think being able to work with partners at different levels of government and industry together and collaboratively, I think that this is something that we can definitely achieve. And that goes back to my point of integrating different ways to value feedstock. I think that's a really key component that we're seeing in terms of being able to mitigate that cost component of how can we make materials more affordable as well without really compromising the quality of the materials.
Thanks. Phil, what about you? Do you want to take the circular economy, FMCG, and extended producer responsibility question?
Well, I think that Nivatha did a great job at diving into the challenges there. The only other thing that I would perhaps add to the discussion is that we're really seeing consumer-driven signals to the market that this is something that people care about. And whether that's ESG reporting or whether that's a lot of these companies that are signaling net zero or circular economy, I really do think it's driven by the sort of a generation of people who are demanding more from the products that they use, and I think that's wonderful. So it's unfortunate in a sense that it's taken this long, and that, but money speaks in a way, and so if everyone could just do their best to sort of support circular economy products, I think that's a takeaway that I certainly try to apply.
Thanks. And over to you, Mike.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add other than I work with some really smart colleagues who are giving some thought leadership on circular economy, and I only kind of learn through osmosis through them. Um, but I guess the main thing that's kind of coming to fruition for me is that it's not just a consumer driven and values driven, but it's also becoming an economic reality for making certain products and industries more viable. And I specifically think about the mining sector and whether we can use consumer product to kind of complete the circle and green the supply chain.
We'll stop questions here and go into breakout rooms so we can do, some more networking and have some more questions. And Lucas is going to send out the notices in a second.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and open up the rooms. There's going to be one panelist per room. And I've tried to break people up. If you've asked questions that pertain to a specific panelist, try to put you in that room. And I encourage you to turn on your camera, turn your voice, get involved, at least introduce yourself to the group, and we can have a lot of fun in these rooms.
And we'll come back in about 15 minutes or so?
Yeah, we'll come back at 7:25, so look out for that. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna open them now. All right, we'll just wait a second for everybody to join back in. Hope you all enjoyed those breakout rooms. I stopped into each one and I found them all super interesting conversations. So really glad everybody participated, was able to make it out. Thank you to all the panelists for taking part in those breakout sessions. Unfortunately, it's good to end on time. So I had to close them down and end those conversations. But of course, thank you all so much for coming to this event. Thank you to the panelists for giving your time on an evening after a long day, probably much of it spent on Zoom already. Really, really grateful to have you here. Thank you to all the members of CEP Ottawa who helped organize this event and helped get the word out and put it together and made sure we had great content. 1 minute warning, we will be doing a photo in just 1 second, so just prepare for that. Please keep your cameras on. As Phil said, and the other panelists kind of echoed this as well, being part of an organization like CEP Ottawa, like some of these other nonprofit organizations, show that you're an active and engaged member of the community and that you have some extra career capital. And CEP is actually hiring. We're looking for a VP of Finance and a Director of Marketing. The job descriptions are on our website under the volunteer page, so I encourage you to reach out and apply by email if you're interested in joining this team. Look out for future events. We have a holiday social coming up in December. That will be announced very, very shortly. And we also have a mentorship program coming in the new year. So you can actually get a closer, more personal relationship with a mentor who has experience in the environmental or sustainability field. Thanks again to everybody. Let's do our picture. Let me just get everything over here. So I'll give you a countdown and then I'll take a screenshot. So everybody, cameras on, smiling faces on. I'm gonna take the picture in 3, 2, 1. And one more, 3, 2, 1, smile. All right, that's all from me. Thank you all so much for joining. Really appreciate you taking the picture, joining the breakout rooms, and taking part in CEP's activities. Thanks so much and have a lovely night.
Take care, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.